This is Classic Clash, the video that may actually be the first of a show, depending on how popular it is. It's a show where I want to take beloved pieces of 90s pop culture and pit them against each other, whether that be TV shows, movies, or video games. And so for the first episode, I wanted to go epic by looking at two of the most beloved games on the SNES. The highest selling platformer for the system was Super Mario World. The highest selling non-Mario platformer on the system was Donkey Kong Country. One helped bring the SNES to life when it launched, and one helped breathe new life into the aging console in 1994, enabling a 16-bit system to go toe-to-toe with the 32-bit Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn, and I guess the 64-bit Jaguar? Both are regarded as two of the greatest video games ever made. Today we're going to pit them against each other to see which one is superior. I want to keep this as fair as possible while also recognizing that ultimately it is still my subjective opinion, but I also want to keep it simple. So here's my plan. I'm going to be judging each game in 5 categories: gameplay, level design, sound design, art direction, and of course, music. I'll be scoring the titles on a scale of 20 in each of the categories. I will then calculate a weighted score out of 20 for each game, and whichever one has the higher score obviously is the superior game. Here is how the weight breaks down. Gameplay is going to account for 35% of the final score, since the mechanics of a game are pretty much the foundation upon which you build. Level design is going to count for 20% of the final score. I mean, after all, what good's a game if the levels aren't actually fun to play through? The remaining 3 categories will each count for 15% of the final score. So yeah, maybe it's a little bit harder than it needs to be. I don't care. I feel like it works. So let's just jump into it, guys. Development on Super Mario World began almost immediately after Super Mario Bros. 3 was completed in 1988. Directing duties would fall to Takashi Tezuka, the man who had co-directed the original Super Mario Bros. And full-on directed Super Mario Bros. 2 and Super Mario Bros. 3. Series veteran and video game legend Koji Kondo would return to provide music for the game, while Shigeru Miyamoto, the series creator, would serve as producer. To say that Super Mario World had some large shoes to fill would be a gigantic understatement. Super Mario Bros. 3 had pushed the NES to its absolute limits. The gameplay was perfect, the levels were immaculately designed, and it played like a game made by a team who knew the platform's hardware inside and out. In short, it's one of the few games in all of history that I would actually give a 10 out of 10 to. So not only did the team have the monumental task of following up one of the greatest games ever made, they had to do it on hardware that they were unfamiliar with, and it all had to be ready for the Super Famicom or SNES launch. So, you know, no pressure. Let's jump into it and tear it down here. First, the gameplay. Like every Mario game before it, and most Mario games that came after it, Super Mario World's controls are like butter. When I jump in Super Mario World, I know exactly where I'm going to land. When I get hit or die, it almost always feels like, yeah, that was my fault, I miscalculated. While the game dialed back the number of power-ups compared to the kind of insane number that you had in Super Mario Bros. 3, the power-ups that are included are integrated so well, it doesn't feel like the game skimped out. It's not missing anything. Of course, the biggest addition to the world of Super Mario came in the form of Yoshi. Now there's a couple conflicting reports as far as the origins go to this little green dinosaur. He's not a dinosaur. What? He's not a dinosaur. What are you talking about? The thing hatches from an egg, it looks reptilian, and he lives in dinosaur land. Not to mention the fact that Miyamoto's been quoted stating that ever since the 80s, he had wanted Mario to ride a dinosaur creature. I mean, he looks like a dinosaur. Yeah, well, Tezuka, Super Mario World's director, remembers Miyamoto telling him he wanted Mario to ride a horse. He also remembers seeing a picture of Mario riding a horse hanging up at Miyamoto's desk. Though to be fair, looking at this picture, I guess I could see how you would mistake that dinosaur for a horse. I don't know, it looks like a dinosaur to me, so who knows who's right here. The original concept for Yoshi did start out as a sort of lizard reptilian dinosaur thing, but Tezuka didn't think it jived with the Super Mario aesthetic, so he drew up a prototype influenced by turtles, and Shigefumi Hino polished it up into the final design we see today, which means that, according to Tezuka at least, the red thing on Yoshi's back is not a saddle. That thing's a shell. I guess to sum up, Yoshi is is just a Yoshi. You done screwed up again, Super Mario World Brothers movie. Well, I derailed on that joke. Super Mario World has perfect gameplay. There's enough variety in power-ups and enough different combinations that really, it allows each player to play in a very distinct way. The mechanics are simple, but put in the hands of the right player, they can be combined to create some truly graceful speedruns. I mean, look at this. That's freaking nuts. I mean, you gotta have some pretty smooth mechanics built into the game to pull that off. So yeah, not surprisingly, I give the gameplay of Super Mario World a perfect 20 out of 20. Now on to level design. Super Mario World has 72 levels, spread across Yoshi's Island, Donut Plains, the Vanilla Dome, the Twin Bridges, the Forest of Illusion, Chocolate Island, Valley of Bowser, there's also a sunken ship, then there's the hidden levels in Star Road, and Special. I mean, there's a lot there. And not only are there 72 levels, but some of the levels actually have secret exits, making for a total of 96 different exits. So even after you beat all of the levels, if you haven't gotten all the exits, you don't get that star by the save file. Each level is a finely tuned obstacle course, with the difficulty ramping up gradually throughout the course of the game. One of the most easily overlooked aspects in classic Mario platformers is how seamless tutorials blend in with the gameplay. And this is particularly important for Super Mario World, as the team were looking to target this at novice players, people for whom the Super Nintendo would be their first console. Take a look at Level 2 in Yoshi's Island, the stage in which Yoshi is introduced. Almost immediately after hopping on the little green guy's back, the player is presented with a red shell Koopa. Swallowing the enemy and then spitting it out reveals that red Koopas allow Yoshi to spit out fire. A little further on, the player encounters a vine. The player soon realizes they cannot climb the vine with Yoshi, and so they need to figure out a way to dismount their steed. It's brilliant level design like this that allows players to learn the mechanics of the game as they play, instead of just having to sit through tutorials. A skill that Nintendo apparently just kinda collectively forgot in the 2000s. I'm looking at you, GameCube Zeldas. The level design of Super Mario World continued the strong tradition set forth by its predecessors, and it gets a well-deserved 20 out of 20. Now we move on to sound design, and I want to explain why I've included sound design as one of the categories. Particularly in an age when video game systems didn't really have rumble feedback, sound design was an important element. The sound that you make when you jump on an enemy, or complete a certain action, or jump, or land, those sounds are important because they give weight to the game. They actually trigger something in your brain that feels satisfying. And so it's incredibly important to get the sound design correct to give the players a feeling of weight and a feeling of accomplishment. In a way, they sort of make up for the fact that you can't actually feel what's going on. I love the sound effects in Super Mario World. Love the sound that you get when you bounce on a spring. I love the sound that you get when Yoshi sticks out his tongue. I love the power-up sound to the cape. That is always going to be one of my favorite video game sound effects. And I love when you're flying the little... Especially since flying in Super Mario World takes a little bit of finesse, so there's like an extra layer of satisfaction that you get when you hear that continuous sound. Yeah. The sound design in Super Mario World, absolutely 20 out of 20, that's easy. So let's look at the art direction of Super Mario World. When compared to its predecessors on the NES, Super Mario World looks very impressive. Of course, as is the case with most launch titles, the developers' unfamiliarity with the SNES hardware meant that they weren't able to really push the system's capabilities, which means that, graphically speaking, Super Mario World tends to look a little simplistic when compared to later offerings on the system. Still, I do believe the simple graphics lend themselves well to Super Mario World, and there's a certain charm to it that can't be denied, despite the fact that they didn't really showcase exactly what the new console could do. But then, what launch game does? I give the art direction for Super Mario World an 18 out of 20 simply because I do feel that they could have gone a little bit further with some of the art direction had they been given a little bit more time. So we're moving on to something a little bit controversial, the music of Super Mario World. My opinion on it is probably a little bit at odds with most people. Music for Super Mario World was once again provided by Koji Kondo, who has stated that it was actually a little bit of a challenge programming music for the SNES at first, simply because he actually had to create the sound samples for the music as opposed to just programming it like he could in the NES days. Whether or not he had problems, I do think that Mr. Kondo still managed to craft an unforgettable score for the game. I mean, Part of the reason why the score is unforgettable is because almost every level in the game features the same melody, remixed based on the environment of the level, sometimes with drums depending on whether or not Mario is riding Yoshi. But yeah, it's the same melody through every single level, and it's kind of a bummer that we don't really get many other unique level themes. I wouldn't be surprised if, because of the troubles that Kondo had, he just didn't have time to write many other melodies. Where the game's music shines is in the overworlds. Each land has music that fits its theming perfectly, with the Valley of Bowser and the Force of Illusion being particular standouts for me. And that end credits music that never fails to tickle my nostalgia bone. Look, Super Mario World's music is good, but it's just not the best that I think Kondo could have done. It would have been interesting to see if Kondo hadn't had the problems that he had, if he had more time to make more music, what it could have been. So yeah, I'm giving the music of Super Mario World a 16 out of 20. Now I know that's probably an unpopular thing, but I mean, a 16 out of 20, I mean, that's still good. It's just not perfection. Anyways, that's Super Mario World, so let's calculate the final score. The final score, assuming I've done my math right, and I'm assuming that if I haven't, I will see about it down in the comments. Super Mario World gets a weighted score of 19.1 out of 20. By the early 90s, Rare had established themselves as one of the most important developers for the NES. From their humble beginnings as Ultimate Play the Game, crafting games for the ZX Spectrum, to their success creating classics like Battletoads for the NES, as well as a crap ton of other games, a number of which were published by LJN. LJ, Mother H and N.
What were they thinking?
The sheer volume of games that they managed to put out with how small the company was, it is really impressive. But by the early 90s, the company's founders, Chris and Tim Stamper, decided they wanted to go a different direction and start focusing more on quality than quantity. Now, the success that they had enjoyed meant that they were a flush with cash. So they invested in a couple of Silicon Graphics workstations, both of which cost £80,000. Upon getting the SGI machines, Rare immediately started work on a boxing game. During an unrelated visit, while the game was being developed, senior Nintendo staff saw what Rare was working on, and were incredibly impressed. They were so impressed, Nintendo bought what would eventually become a 49% stake in the company, making Rare a second-party developer for Nintendo. Even more fortuitously, Nintendo gave Rare the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, allowing the company access to their IP for their next game. And Donkey Kong, who had been dormant for a number of years, seemed like the best candidate. Unlike Super Mario World, none of the levels in Donkey Kong Country are timed. There's no score being kept. Instead, players are encouraged to explore each level, discovering hidden bonus rooms, bananas, animal tokens, and of course, the Kong letters. Instead of a high score, you were given a percentage of the number of bonus rooms that you had found and secrets that you had found in the game. In lieu of power-ups like you would see in Super Mario World and other platformers, players are sometimes able to ride a few animal friends and... Good lord, what is Donkey Kong doing to that fish? The animals provide a nice variety without being used too much. While there were traditional platforming levels, there were also a couple levels that deviated a little bit. Talking of course about the minecart levels. And then of course there were also levels with barrel cannons, which move and require perfect timing to navigate. Oh yeah, and there's also water levels. For those of you who enjoy those, I'm sure you exist. And I bet you're the kind of person that pours their milk before they pour their cereal. Donkey Kong is definitely harder than Super Mario World. For the most part, it's a legitimate challenge. However, there are a few deaths that can feel cheap. The visuals of the game, while stunning and revolutionary for the time, can sometimes make it difficult to judge jumps and hitboxes. The physics in the game also feel a little bit loose. Still, I do think it says a lot about a game that, despite feeling frustrated here and there, I always push through it and keep playing, because the vast majority of gameplay is fun and addictive, and you want to see what comes next. It's not the perfect gameplay of Super Mario World, but it's still incredibly high caliber. I'd give Donkey Kong Country an 18 out of 24 gameplay. Now, most of the levels in Donkey Kong Country also flow pretty darn well. There are a few instances that require a leap of faith. Those leaps of faith translate into moments that feel kind of cheap. Overall, the level design in Donkey Kong Country feels a little bit sophomoric, not quite as refined as that of Super Mario World. To put it another way, there are few games that made me want to throw my SNES in the trash more than Donkey Kong Country. On the other hand, there are a few games which made me cherish my SNES more than Donkey Kong Country. Yes, the level design can lead to frustration every now and then, but ultimately, the level design is also interesting enough to keep you coming back. The level design isn't perfect, but I'd still give it an 18 out of 20. Now we get to the part of the review, the video. What am I doing? Now we get to the part of the video where I just heap praise on this incredible game. Look, it's readily apparent that Donkey Kong Country looks much different than pretty much any SNES title that preceded it. The objects in the game were rendered on SGI workstations and then transformed into color-reduced 2D images that could be displayed on the Super Nintendo. This revolutionary process enabled Donkey Kong Country, a game that was developed for an aging 16-bit console, to compete with offerings put forth by Sony and Sega's 32-bit consoles. The designs of each of the Kongs are filled to the brim with personality. From their idle animations to the frustration they show when they lose a bonus round, they definitely do not lack for charm. I think what impresses me most about the art direction in the game is actually the environments themselves. The game goes from a nearly pristine jungle to mines filled with industrial equipment, to ancient temples, to a forest that has treetop dwellings that always made me think of Return of the Jedi, to a frigid mountaintop, and then on to a polluted and desolate factory. Each stage feels like a real place, with stage elements for the most part feeling like natural objects instead of abstract floating platforms. Everything unnatural like dwellings, minecarts, barrels, and crates have a ragtag, distressed aesthetic that is just so charming. It makes the country of Donkey Kong Country feel more real and thus draws the player further in. And unlike almost all platformers that preceded it, even the enemies themselves actually have personality. I love the little quirks of like Naughty every time you jump on him and his stupid little laugh. Ooh. And it's funny to think that Nintendo had some reservations about the visual direction in the game, with Gunpei Yokoi saying that the game was too 3D and realistic. I'm just really glad that Rare stuck to their guns and didn't listen, because Donkey Kong Country is such a unique looking game. It's not a surprise to anybody that I'm giving the game a perfect 20 out of 20 for its art direction. And of course, what is art direction without good sound design? Let's just listen to him. Oh, everything is just so god dang satisfying. It's another 20 out of 20 for Donkey Kong Country. Lastly, that brings us to the music of Donkey Kong Country, which is So again, assuming I did the math right here, that puts Donkey Kong Country at an overall rating of 18.9 out of 20.
Wow.
Which means that in the battle of the SNES behemoths, Super Mario World manages to barely scrape out a victory over Donkey Kong Country. Super Mario World is the better game. To be fair to the House of Rareware, Donkey Kong Country 2 improved on almost every single shortcoming the first game had. In fact, I really fretted over whether or not I should compare the second game to Super Mario World, to give the series as a whole a fair shake. But Donkey Kong Country, in spite of its truly minor shortcomings, just had such a major influence over the SNES. It's the highest selling non-Mario game on the SNES. It's the game that established Rareware as a second-party developer for Nintendo, opening the door for greats like Banjo-Kazooie, and it's a good thing that Nintendo never let something stupid happen. You know, like letting Rareware be courted by another publisher willing to buy them. Good call, Nintendo. Not only did you put yourself in a crappy position for the 6th generation of video games, but Rare's never been the same since. Oh well. At least we've got Banjo and Smash. And Nintendo and Microsoft, they seem to be getting pretty friendly, so, you know, who knows what the future holds. Yeah, maybe Super Mario World isn't the flashiest game on the SNES. It doesn't utilize any fancy special chips or techniques, and it's not the greatest demonstration of what the SNES is really capable of. But the gameplay is so tight, so enduring, and its simplicity actually goes a long way to making its visuals timeless. They don't age. Anyways, guys, that is Classic Clash. What do you guys think? What do you think about Super Mario World beating out Donkey Kong Country? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Was my scoring system just way too complicated? Let me know in the comments below, and let me know, do you want me to do more of these? I'd be more than happy to have other things clash, you know, whether they be movies, or TV shows, or video games. Let me know in the comments below, or you can tweet at me at the90skid89 with your suggestions, and I would be happy to go through your suggestions. Thanks for all the support. Thanks for watching. I don't think I've said this enough. I can't believe I'm at 40,000 subscribers. You guys are awesome.